All right, guys, so we're getting started on our multimeter testing lab, let's call it, okay? It's really just the multimeter lab. The way the lab is set up is really you're just going to answer a lot of questions, but they're all based on doing physical things or just how the multimeter works, okay? So you're going to probably need your multimeter. You're going to go along as you're working through this activity. You're going to, play with your multimeter. It's going to ask you some questions about how it works. You might need to maybe like what happens when you press this button or something like that. So make sure you have your multimeter out. It's got batteries in it and it works before you start this activity. Again, you can take this activity as many times as you want to make sure you get 100% on it. There's no reason that you're not going to get a good grade on this one, okay? Just take the time and work through it is all it takes, okay? The next thing the other questions on this thing, a lot of them are about the multimeter, but some of them are about components, okay? So these components are going to have a base and then the actual relay itself. This one is a relay. So make sure that they are actually plugged into that base. When it's asking you questions, it'll be like, hey, take your multimeter and test for resistance across the coil. And then I'm going to make sure I give you guys the actual terminal numbers. That way you're not kind of guessing, well, which one's the coil? Later on, we will go over how the schematic works on one of these relays, so that way you could find the coil without knowing the terminal numbers for the wires, okay? So all you're gonna do is when I'm asking you what is like the resistance, you're gonna set your multimeter up for resistance, and then you're going to test across the terminals. I don't know if you guys can see this. You're gonna test across those terminals that I tell you to, all right? So like I said, this one is a relay. This one right here is another relay. Again, I will have the part numbers for this relay and the terminal number on the question, okay? So there should be no guesswork of which one you're using. And then I'm gonna have, this is a contactor, all right? We're gonna explain how all these work and what they do later on, but right now we're just gonna be testing them, okay? I might ask you what the resistance is across the light or something like that. We are going to test across the terminals on the back of these, okay? So you should test from one side to the other. It may ask you if a switch like this is a normally open or a normally closed switch. One, you could just look at the schematic on the side, and we haven't really talked about this, but the schematic is on the side here, and it actually tells you whether it's normally open or normally closed. But I want you to learn how to test them with your multimeter, because ultimately, if you're testing a switch to see if it's bad or if it's good, or maybe it doesn't have a schematic on the side, you can use your multimeter. It's always fall back to your multimeter. Make sure you're using that thing, okay? But again, if I asked you to test across the switch, I want you to switch to that continuity setting with the siren or the buzzer, and I want you to test across it and see if it's making sound when you press the button or when you're not. To figure out whether it's normally open or normally closed, okay? Now, one thing about these switches that is a little bit different, maybe you haven't seen before, is this green or red block that is screwed into the back side of these. The reason these are screwed on is you can actually change the style of switch, or you can actually change it so it has more switches hooked to one button, okay? So if you want, you can play around with that, screw them off, take a look at them. Sometimes they do get damaged or broken, so you will probably replace these throughout this class, okay? But that's pretty much, I believe, all you're gonna need to know. It's okay if you don't know all of the answers or what to do in every one of these. Make sure you ask, please. Make sure you ask me, Michael, Scott, Danny. Ask all of us how to do something, because you're gonna want to learn this. Because later on, when you're actually troubleshooting or you're trying to figure out something, you want to be very confident with that multimeter, okay? So go ahead and get started. Like I said, take it as many times as you need to get it completed, all right?